Well, here we go, Season 3. The first season to not have John K. or Spumco involved. Let's see if they continue to make good episodes. And we start off the season with To South and South Not. A pretty decent start to the season. While some of the gags aren't that funny, it's still a decent episode. Now, let's move on to A Yard Too Far. I actually quite like this one. While it does look cheap, the gags are funny enough to make it a good episode. Now, let's move on to Circus Midgets. What a horrible and mean-spirited episode where Ren and Stimpy just get tortured and it's not fun to watch, it's more sad than funny. Now let's move on to No Pants Today. Another mean-spirited episode where Stimpy is just getting tortured and it just makes you feel sorry for the poor guy. Now let's move on to Ren's Pecs. This is a meh episode, the gags aren't really funny and some of the drawings look really ugly. Now let's move on to An Abe Divided. This is an alright episode. The gags are hit or miss, but some of the drawings are pretty good, so I'll excuse it. Now, let's move on to Stimpy's Cartoon Show. Finally, it's been so long since we got a good episode, and I'm happy to say that this episode is really good and has a lot of funny gags. Although I will admit, I don't like the way Ren is drawn in some scenes here, like he just looks so ugly. Now, let's move on to Jimmy Lummox. Another alright one. The gags aren't really that funny, and it takes a long time before we get to the title character, but it's alright. Now, let's move on to Bassmasters. Remember Wilbur H. Cobb from Stimpy's Cartoon Show? Well, starting from this episode, they began to just shoehorn him into episodes where he doesn't belong just so he can give his voice actor more work. Anyways, bad episode. Now, let's move on to Ren's Retirement. It's a meh episode with barely any funny gags, that's all I have to say about it. Now, let's move on to Road Apples. Another unpleasant episode where Ren and Stimpy are just tortured just for the sake of comedy, and once again they shoehorn in Wilbur H. Cobb for no reason. Now let's move on to Jerry the Belly Button Elf. I'm sorry, I know this episode has its fans, but I really can't stand it. The drawings are ugly, the gags aren't funny, and not even the great Guilford Godfrey could save it, I'm sorry. Now let's move on to Hard Times for Haggis. Another alright episode. No disrespect at all to Chris Riccardi, he's a great artist, but his simple style does not really fit Ren and Stimpy, and this episode shows why. Now let's move on to Eat My Cookies. Surprise, surprise! Another bad and unpleasant episode where Ren and Stimpy are once again fall guys to a one-time character that takes center stage. Now let's move on to Ren's Bitter Half. It's just Stimpy's invention, but this time Ren gets split into two characters, an evil Ren and an indifferent Ren. Anyways, alright episode. And finally, to close off this season, we've got Lair of the Lummox. This is actually a sequel to Season 1's Untamed World, and I'm not gonna lie, I actually like this one. It's definitely not the 10 out of 10 masterpiece that Untamed World is, but it's still a great episode. A really good way to end off what is otherwise a really weak season. If you couldn't tell already, Season 3 is without doubt the worst season of the entire show so far. There was only like 3 episodes that I thought were good, with the rest being either decent, mediocre, or just downright awful. Hopefully Season 4 is better, but I'm not keeping my hopes up.